Why hello you amazing beautiful people, and welcome back to another AniNews reaction video. And we're continuing our journey checking out all of the videos that all of you have been asking me to react to. There's a bunch from Overlord, Danmachi, and this one right here from Mushoku Tensei. Now, before I get into this one, I just need to let all of you know I'm very ill. Like, I'm not good. I had a really rough morning. I'm not gonna go into details. I'm not well. I ate something, it didn't agree with me, so I'm gonna be a bit weird and loopy for this reaction. You're gonna just have to deal with it. But man, I'm flagging is what I'm gonna say. But just in case you guys are like, Luke seems weird today, I was like, I wanted to address it at the beginning. So Mushoku Tensei being one of my absolute favorite anime, especially the last second half of season 2 and how incredibly well written that was. I feel like that really cemented my love for this entire series. I've always kind of wanted to know how strong Rudy actually is, because in like the early stages of this anime, it seems like Rudy is just the strongest being like in existence, but we soon find out that he isn't. Rudy is just a character, like, because the other thing is Rudy also comes across quite weak, because throughout the anime he's fighting with strong people. It's weird how he can be so strong and so weak at the same time, and then when he fights against weaker people we see how strong he actually is. So I've always just had a lot of questions around like, how strong actually is he? You know, in the grand scheme of things, is he a little fly or is he a big fish? I don't know. Let's find out. So we're going to jump into this AniNews video. Please go subscribe to AniNews. Please like and subscribe to this channel as well, considering how close we are to 50k. We are so close now, so please subscribe. And let's jump into my first reaction to how strong is Rudeus Greyrat from Mushoku Tensei.
Rudeus Greyrat is one of the more unique isekai protagonists. Not particularly in the way his character is portrayed, but more so in the way that he's developed. What I mean is that every aspect of his power has some form of explanation to it. He's not overpowered just for the sake of being overpowered, but instead we get to understand how exactly it is he obtains every bit of power he has. It's a much more grounded approach to the power scaling aspect of isekai that we usually don't ever get to see, especially if you compare it to other isekai where the scale typically starts at the top. So let's kick off this season of Mushoku Tensei Explained videos and take a look at how strong Rudeus has become up to where he is at the end of episode 11. Let's get started.
Okay, so this is going to be interesting. So this is about how strong he is through, what, season 1? This is going to be really interesting.
The origins of Rudeus' power all stem from that very first textbook he found. A textbook of magic that we know taught him the basics. There were the 3 types of magic, the innate magical power required to use magic, the 2 main ways in which that magic was cast, and finally the supposed fact that one's level of magical power was inherited. The last was of course proven to be a misconception, but it is widely believed that the amount of magical power someone has is pretty much determined at birth. So, with these being the fundamentals, it's the way that Rudeus approaches them that makes his rise to power somewhat different. You see, he didn't start out with these amazing skills or abilities like how Rimuru or Ainz did. No. Instead, he taught himself various powerful techniques by applying these fundamentals of magic in ways that could only be possible due to his modern knowledge of science from his past life.
One thing I'm really grateful for is because of the amount of like isekai we've seen. Like we've seen like the top tier, like most well-reviewed and like biggest isekai so far. Probably not all of them, but like the majority of them. And what I'm trying to get at here is it's really cool because whenever there's references, it's always ones I've seen, you know, whether it's like Overlord or Saga of Time of the Eve or freaking like, at that time I got reincarnated slime. Like, they're always ones I've seen, you know, which is nice because I can always like relate. And it's rare because I never feel like that's the case. But when it comes to Isekai, it feels like, yeah, I was like, ah, okay, I actually know a little bit.
That's the key thing that differentiates Rudeus from everyone else.
Nice.
By not being limited by the common preconceptions of the people of this new world. Not only can Rudeus investigate things for himself, but he can also test numerous different hypotheses and possibilities.
Yeah, he almost learns magic by like
to see
how most of us learn
with elemental magic.
A language.
Before we get to what those spells are though. The core of Rudeus' power mostly comes from things he'd taught himself while he was an infant. It's not so much something that can be attributed to the skills and spells he'd learned along the way, but more so the path and methods he took to develop himself. So, rather than focus on his individual spells and abilities, I think what's more important to focus on here is his techniques. The first of which was the extremely rare act of voiceless incantation. By placing himself into a state of mind that allows him to envision the spell that he wants, Rudeus found he was able to manipulate mana into almost any form imaginable. Of course, it wasn't something he could do instantly right from the get-go, but by practicing the same spell over and over, Rudeus slowly learned to remember the sensations he felt while doing so. Once those feelings were ingrained into his mind and body, all that was left was to replicate them whenever that spell was needed.
I've heard the book.
Imitating those same sensations throughout his mind and body allowed Rudeus to connect himself to the aspect of reality that he was trying to manipulate, pretty much in the exact same way that an incantation or magic circle did. After that, the final steps were to simply decide on the spell's size, shape, and strength. So,
good picture for strength. It's kind of interesting. I feel like Mushoku Tensei has one of the easiest to explain power systems ever. And even though, like, the core fundamentals of it may be complicated, the simple understanding of it is fairly easy, you know? I mean, even with Rudeus literally imagining it and it becoming true, and where all the power is drawn from and how he was able to get stronger, not starting at the top, but starting at the bottom and literally teaching himself from square one. To be honest, having that aspect does make it a lot easier to understand than having someone who does start at the top.
It's an inherently different method of casting that doesn't require a magic circle or incantation.
Because it means we were with him since day one.
Instead, the medium that manipulates the mana is simply the caster's mind and body. Now, while this is the fastest method of casting magic, it's not necessarily the most efficient. Yes, it does appear strong in comparison to the lengthy chants that are normally used, but at the same time it also requires a high level of focus and sometimes significantly more mana. Should a mage attempt to silently cast magic without an extensive mana capacity similar to Rudeus's, then it's likely they would find their mana reserves severely depleted after only a single spell. Reason being that modifications of size, shape, and speed that would normally be handled by the incantation or magic circle would now require additional mana from the caster, regardless of whether they're making a water ball smaller or bigger. Just the action of changing its default size still requires that additional bit of magical energy. So the more intricate...
So it's kind of like the idea of, like let's say we got a mana circle and Rudy. Rudy can just think and change all of these things internally and therefore not expressing as much mana. But if you were using a circle and then you try to change it internally or through that circle, you're going to have to, any changes or anything you want to do to the spell is going to require a lot more mana. Basically, Rudy's ability somehow simplifies it, making it that he doesn't use as much mana, but he also has a huge mana capacity. Then something that does is like a bit more, what's the word? What's the word when it's like not... What's the word if I had like a car and it had like 1 mile to the gallon, you know?
The spell becomes with regards to its modifications, the more mana it requires to cast it.
How you describe that, like not
That's
good.
why it's sometimes better to just rely on an incantation. Especially if you're a mage who doesn't have the same extensive supply of mana that Rudeus does. As for why that's such a big deal, well, when it comes to magic, mana capacity is pretty much everything. You see, a mage in combat who doesn't have any mana is essentially the same thing as having Aqua as your support.
Ha!
They're completely useless and utterly unreliable.
Oh no!
So, because Rudeus had spent
Aqua.
the majority of his youth exhausting his own mana supply, he was able to increase its total capacity to a level that's around 40 to 50 times greater than that of an advanced magician. Making this yet another one of the core aspects of magic that make him so powerful. Not only does this allow him to cast way more spells than what's normal, but it also means he can pump more mana into them to make them more potent. It's one of the most crucial aspects of his overall ability. Now, some of the initial spells that Rudeus had started with were the beginner level water spells like Water Ball, Water Shield, and Water Arrow, each requiring different amounts of magical energy depending on their application. There were also the spells of Ice Smash and Ice Blade, but Rudeus quickly determined that he wasn't only limited to those two. By tweaking the creation process for a spell like Water Ball, Rudeus found that he could freeze it into an ice ball, thus introducing him to a whole new world of experimentation. By the time he was...
Which is what we saw when he was experimenting with water and fire, you know? Like the idea of being able to combine these different spells and abilities to make kind of new ones, you know?
3. Rudeus had exemplified his intermediate level skills with the spell Water Cannon. And it was during his subsequent training with Roxy that he could no longer reach the bottom of his mana supply. Even after spending an entire half of a day using magic, at no point did Rudeus feel exhausted from significant mana depletion. It was only 1 year later that Rudeus had become proficient in advanced level spells, a lot of which were ranged attacks from each of the different branches of magic, and all of which could be cast without using an incantation.
And if you compare him
then
to even
the final
now
concept
as well.
he learned after that was the ever-growing field of melded magic. This was the ability to cast spells from different schools in quick succession, thus resulting in the creation of a new phenomena. It was during his study of this topic that we learned Rudeus could use the AoE spells of Heat Island and Icicle Field, The former essentially heated up the surrounding area, while the latter did the opposite and froze it. Combine these two with a constant cast of waterfall, and what you get is a combined magic spell that creates mist. In any case, that's pretty much the essence of how Rudeus likes to approach his attack magic. Well, not those two spells specifically, but the ability to combine several ones together to create something new.
I wonder if this episode is going to go into his eye as well, you know? The idea of how strong is he, looking at his eye and other abilities along that sort of line. This did say it ended at episode 11. A lot of time has obviously passed, especially considering him now in the north as well and everything since then. So maybe we'll do a part 2 to this if there is a part 2 video, because it'll be interesting to see how strong he is now as well.
He's always looking for new ways to increase both the efficiency and potency of his magic, part of which comes from experimenting with new combinations of different spells. My nose is bad
as well today.
Now, one of the spells that I do want to focus on is the Water Saint level attack magic known as Cumulonimbus. Reason being that this is a prime example of what exactly it is that's required from a Saint level magician casting Saint level magic. So, despite this just looking like a spell that creates thunder and causes rain, the way it works is actually a little bit more complicated. One thing to note before going further though is that the whole point of the test was to see if Rudy could keep the spell active for at least an hour. Of course, he could just stand there, hands above his head, and maintain the spell manually, but that wasn't what Rudeus thought Roxy was looking for. Instead, he believed that she was looking for him to use some form of combined magic to keep it going automatically. So, once the clouds had been formed, a series of complex motions were then used to turn them into thunderclouds. It was at this point that a constant influx of magic would be needed to prevent the clouds from dissipating. Unless Rudy kept funneling magic to keep it going, the spell would disappear and he would fail.
Okay.
So that's when Rudeus thought to use some combined magic with a little bit of science. Since he knew thunderstorms formed when warm, moist air rises into cold air, Rudeus conjured a horizontal whirlwind, then heated the air beneath it, the result of which was an updraft that he could then cool using the air above it.
Rudy did this with his own scientific knowledge. He applied real-world science to this magical element. I had no clue.
Once he increased the speed to add that little nudge of instability, all the ingredients were now there to create a naturally occurring
even if it was explained in the anime, it was a while ago.
The only thing left was to simply sit back and hope the storm would last for at least an hour. This was the feat that had granted Rudeus the title of Water Saint. Unlike how Rudeus had thought though, Roxy really just wanted to see if he could maintain a Saint level spell for over an hour. But the instant she saw that he didn't even need to, that's when she knew that he was more than competent enough to pass. But anyway, this is the type of mana manipulation that's required to be a Saint level magician. It's not so much the type of spells that you can cast, but more so the extent to which you're capable of manipulating mana. That's what differentiates a powerful mage from a weak one.
Okay. That's
moving on to when Rudeus was 6, all his skills in attack magic were still at the advanced level except for water. His healing magic was split between intermediate and beginner, then his swordsmanship was stuck at beginner for both sword god and water god style. As I said before, this superior proficiency with elemental magic mostly comes from his modern understanding of scientific principles. Had he had the knowledge of a doctor, then Rudeus believed it's likely his healing magic would be at that same advanced level as well. But
I see, okay, so he's able to basically lean heavily into the magical elements because of his scientific sort of knowledge, which is why they then use the comparison of a doctor and the healing sort of aspect. Basically saying that his previous life was able to aid scientifically to his current magical one. Okay.
Because his understanding in this particular area was significantly lacking, healing without an incantation was actually incredibly difficult for him. When it came to anything else though, so long as it was a visible and understandable phenomenon of the world, then Rudeus felt he would be able to reproduce it with magic. For example, at the age of 7, Rudeus could now distinguish the different elements in the air around him. If he focused hard enough, then he found he could sense and potentially manipulate the individual particles. So, say he wanted to melt a rock using only the air around him, then Rudeus believed all he needed to do was simply pump oxygen and hydrogen into it. That way the continuous heat from the ongoing chemical reaction would constantly increase until the rock itself would start to melt.
Combining the real
He could also just create lava with the advanced combined spell of Magma Gusher, but the first option was the more scientific solution. In any case,
I honestly had no idea that a lot of these magical abilities had come from like some sort of scientific basis. I had no clue. Again, it probably was explained in Mushoku Tensei at some point that Rudy was using a lot of his previous scientific knowledge, but I didn't know he was that much of like an advocate for it. I didn't know he had that much knowledge, like prior knowledge. And even if it was mentioned before, I totally missed it. I don't remember that. I had no idea that this was the basis for a lot of his understanding of it, which I find incredibly realistic, by the way, and it's just another tick for Mushoku Tensei for me.
These were the types of tweaks that Rudeus would apply to his spells to make them more powerful. By manipulating individual components and elements of a single spell, he found that he could increase the potency or power of whatever output he was going for. It really just depended on the type of spell that he was working with. Aside from that though, this was the limit to what Rudeus' past life could provide for him. Anything beyond these slight modifications from his own personal knowledge was completely out of reach since there was no one to teach him. His 34 years of mostly wasted life could only get him so far here. And this was the wall that Rudeus realized he had arrived at now.
Which obviously explains why he didn't really have that much more development.
He would need to understand this new world a little bit more. A feat that was...
I did feel like this with Rudy, because when you're watching Mushoku Tensei, it feels like Rudy's strength and like magical strength goes like this, and then just stops. And I felt like it was very weird. And then it even felt like other people were getting stronger than him. And obviously now we know why. Because he didn't have any more previous knowledge to draw from, and no one was teaching him anything new.
It's only possible by leaving the small
he wasn't able to
that
climb the ladder as quickly as he was before.
So, if we skip ahead to Rudeus' time as a tutor, the first thing we get to see is the extent of his healing magic. Both basic healing and X-healing are available to him so long as he uses an incantation. Then, out of all the various types of elemental magic we saw him use during episode 5, the majority of it was simple applications of elemental manipulation. The wall was nothing more than a basic earth spell, and the fireball was actually just 2 different types of fireballs combined together. Now, something we didn't get to see in the anime was Rudeus' concurrent use of 2 different spells to rescue Eris. In his right hand, Rudeus had cast the intermediate wind magic Sonic Boom, and in his left he had cast the intermediate earth magic Stone Cannon. While Sonic Boom cut the arm off of the man who was holding Eris, Stone Cannon kept the other one busy enough for Eris to be rescued. The rest was the same clever applications of elemental magic that we saw in the anime. Now, something interesting to note about this is that Ghislaine believed this level of combat instinct to be nothing short of genius. Well, at least for someone his age anyway. The fact that he was able to overwhelm an advanced level North God style swordsman was more than enough proof to show his unique fighting style was actually quite useful. Yes, he did drop his guard towards the end, but to initiate and win a fight with someone from over 100 meters away was a feat that not even Ghislaine thought that she could pull off. As the years went on, the only true practice Rudeus ever got in magic was through the creation of his figures. He would use Stone Cannon as the base for the spell, then adjust its speed to 0 and focus solely on configuration. This may seem like a difficult way to measure improvement, but...
It is interesting because we've mentioned this before. Like, when he became a tutor, we didn't see that development. And now we're hearing that he only was able to like learn through the figure making, which is also funny considering of what that figure making has then led to. I mean, with the introduction of a freaking, mannequin that's being, or like a magic mannequin that's being manipulated currently as well in the anime too, which I'm curious to see where that goes as well. You know, that wasn't really explained much more.
Rudeus found that over time his figures were becoming more and more detailed. So perhaps that meant his proficiency with earth magic was actually increasing. At the very least, it did show he was making his mental vision into reality a lot better. Since there was nothing else to learn in the way of magic though, Rudeus hadn't gained a single new spell in all the years he'd been there.
Yeah.
Instead, the only thing worth mentioning is the gift of Aqua Heartia, a magic staff that serves to increase the potency of any type of magic being cast. With the wood coming from an A-rank Elder Treant who could manipulate water magic, and the crystal being an A-rank drop from a wayward sea dragon, it's clear this staff was designed specifically to increase the potency of Rudeus' water magic.
This is something that always pisses me off a little bit, is that the worlds are so intricate and amazing and detailed, and like we just got in, like literally just then I'm hearing that there's this wayward sea dragon and it looks awesome, and we're never going to see that. I would love to see more of the nature and the monsters and the ocean. Why did they not explore ocean that much in anime, man? Like, the ocean is so cool and terrifying. I want more, like, ocean crossings in anime.
Resulting in it being capable of amplifying it by a factor of 5. What this meant in terms of numbers was that if a spell usually cost 10 mana and had a power of 5, then the same spell with the staff would now have a power of 25.
Oh.
If he wanted that spell to have a power of 5 again, then by using the staff, the mana cost would only be 2. So, not only did Aqua Heartia
Oh.
scale his offensive power upward, but it could also scale the mana cost of the same level power spells downward.
Yeah.
Making this a truly special gift that greatly increased his magic proficiency.
Yeah, like in a weird
Moving
way,
on to the
increasing his
events in
mana,
the Demon
or at least
Continent
his
now,
mana usage.
there's not much to highlight other than a few powerful spells here and there. I mean, it's not like Rudeus could properly train, since depleting his mana would put himself at a significant disadvantage. So, of the ones we did see, there was a powerful iteration of Stone Cannon in which Rudeus didn't hold back on the output. He had optimized the projectile's shape into a snub-nosed bullet with grooves, then sent it flying with a maximum rotation speed and velocity, the result of which was an impact that literally exploded the stone treant he was fighting. Then, the attack he used while fighting the Red Hood Cobra was an interesting bit of melded magic between Stone Cannon and a little bit of fire. By creating a hollow wedge-shaped rock, then filling it with concentrated fire magic, the projectile was now an explosive bullet that would detonate on impact,
Oh, shit.
leaving a gaping hole through anyone unlucky enough to get hit by it. But other than that, that's pretty much everything we know about Rudeus' powers so far. It's hard to say just how strong he is in comparison to everyone else, since the only other mages he's ever met are really Roxy and Sylphie. So the only things we really know he has going for him are his vast reserves of mana and unique approach to elemental magic. I'm sure we'll figure that out soon enough, but until then there's a whole bunch of other topics that I want to talk about first. So if you want to see more Mushoku Tensei videos similar to these, then be sure to leave a like and comment letting me know. Now, before I go, I do want to thank Zictor from the Mushoku Tensei subreddit for helping me out with this.
There you go. Thank you, bro, from the Mushoku Tensei subreddit, and a link to AniNews' channel, of course, is in the description. So make sure you go support AniNews, who has been crushing it recently, especially with the solo leveling content. I have to say, the way I've always looked at Rudy when watching Mushoku Tensei is this character that we were introduced to that proceeded to climb the ladder of strength super freaking quick. Then, when reaching these pinnacle moments, when feeling like they plateaued, you know, climbed very quickly, then plateaued and sort of felt like they stopped climbing. I'm not going to make much sense because I'm not well, so I apologize if I'm not articulating myself in a good way. But basically, I saw Rudy as this character that like climbed up very fast, then stopped, and then everyone just overtook him, right? Or just something along those lines. But the other thing I noticed was whenever we were comparing Rudy to anybody, it was the strongest people. He was literally fighting the strongest people for his entire life until he went to the academy. So it was really hard to gauge just how strong Rudy was until, in my opinion, he went to the academy. And then at the academy, especially with his interaction with a certain demon, showcased that he is very strong. But we've only seen him take on beings that are the strongest of the strong, making it almost look like Rudy was weak. But when Rudy takes on people who are of equal or lesser strength to him, we get to see that, like, that truly shine, you know? Like, when, or in a better way of describing it, when Rudy was surrounded by a ton of incredibly powerful people, we got to see that Rudy was one of the, if not the strongest one in the room. And that was the first time we've seen him like that. And like I said, it all sort of cemented itself for me when he went to the academy, which is why I'm pointing that out, which I found really interesting. Because now, I definitely want to check out part 2 if AniNews did a part 2, like an updated version of this. Because I'd love to know how strong Rudy is now. Because Rudy's strength, for me, is just... He's not... The thing I love about Mushoku Tensei is Rudy is nowhere near overpowered. He loses so many fights. He has to come back to them over and over again, and he can't fight alone. He fights with a party. Rudy is probably one of the most realistic characters in an isekai, in terms of character development, personality, even though he's sus, and actual ability as well. He doesn't walk into a room and kill everything. Like, he is constantly improving. So his strength I find the most fascinating, because he's a character I really want to become stronger, but a character that loses so many fights. And even though he does become stronger, it's very rare he's the strongest in the room. You know, it's not like everyone's always relying on him. In fact, we see him relying on so many other people. It's almost kind of similar to how Gon is in Hunter x Hunter, you know? And I kind of like that. But obviously, I would say like Mushoku Tensei does it in a much more realistic sense. I truly believe Mushoku Tensei is one of the best isekai ever created that I've watched. And I think Rudy is one of the most interesting and uniquely developed characters in all of anime. and very realistically done as well, Mushoku Tensei, which is what I love so much about it. It doesn't feel like such a heavy fantasy and out there world. It feels like a world not too dissimilar from our own, with a lot of fantasy elements, kind of like Lord of the Rings, you know, which I really love about it. But yeah, I definitely want to check out part 2 and see how strong he is, if there is one. And let me know if there's any other videos from AniNews or any other anime videos or anime OSTs, openings, songs, anything. Let me know in that comment section down below. Hopefully you guys are enjoying these deep dive reactions. Press the like button and subscribe if you are. Sorry that I'm ill. Hopefully you still enjoyed the reaction. And as always, my friends, you will see me in the next video.